The massive warship Crimson Fong drifted through the void between stars, its hull scarred from countless battles across a dozen worlds. Inside its armored chambers, the most feared creature in known space lay chained with bonds forged from neutronium, the only material strong enough to hold him. Karath the Destroyer had been many things in his long life. A warrior prince of the Draknari Empire, a conqueror who had brought entire star systems to their knees, a beast whose very name made hardened soldiers weep and surrender without firing a shot. But now, as he hung suspended in his prison cell, he was simply tired. The chains had held him for 3 standard years. 3 years since his last great victory, when he had torn through the defenses of New Babylon like paper and left their capital city in smoking ruins. 3 years since the Galactic Council had finally managed to capture him through treachery rather than strength. They had used poison gas pumped into his command ship while he slept, too cowardly to face him in open battle. Karath's reptilian eyes snapped open as he heard the familiar hum of the ship's engines changing pitch. They were dropping out of hyperspace. Another world to conquer, another population to terrorize into submission. But this time would be different. This time, he would not be leading the charge. The cell door hissed open, and Admiral Vex stepped inside. The thin, gray-skinned Altarian wore the pristine uniform of the Galactic Navy, every medal and ribbon perfectly aligned. His cold eyes studied Karath with the clinical detachment of a scientist examining a dangerous specimen. "Wake up, monster," Vex said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "We have work for you." Karath said nothing. He had learned that silence unnerved his captors more than roars or threats. His massive frame, nearly 3 meters tall and covered in scales harder than most armor, remained perfectly still as he watched the Admiral pace. "The planet below is called Earth," Vex continued, activating a holographic display that showed a blue and green world spinning slowly in the void. "Third planet from a yellow star, inhabited by a species that calls itself human. They have been causing problems." The display zoomed in to show images of human settlements, their primitive cities, and crude technology. Karath snorted with disdain. These creatures looked weak, their bodies soft and pink, lacking claws or natural armor. Their technology appeared to be centuries behind even the most backward worlds he had conquered. "Problems?" Karath's voice was a low growl that seemed to come from the depths of his massive chest. "These insects could not threaten a child." Admiral Vex smiled, and something in that expression made even Karath feel a flicker of unease. "That is where you are wrong, beast. These humans have done something that no other species has managed in over 1,000 years of galactic expansion." The holographic display shifted to show a fleet of Galactic Navy ships approaching Earth's moon. Karath watched with growing interest as the human response unfolded. Their ships were small and primitive, built from steel and chemical rockets rather than the advanced materials and energy drives used by civilized races. Yet somehow, impossibly, they were winning. "Watch carefully," Vex said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "This happened 6 months ago. The battle played out before Karath's eyes like a deadly dance. The human ships moved with a coordination that seemed impossible for such a primitive species. They used tactics that the Galactic Navy had never encountered, ramming attacks with ships loaded with nuclear weapons, fighters that seemed to ignore their own safety in suicidal charges, massive kinetic projectiles launched from the planet's surface that struck with devastating accuracy. But it was not just their tactics that impressed Karath. It was their refusal to surrender. Every other species the Galactic Council had encountered followed the same pattern when faced with overwhelming force. First came the negotiations, then the conditional surrender, and finally, the complete capitulation. The humans did none of these things. Instead, they fought harder as the battle turned against them. When their main fleet was destroyed, they launched smaller attacks from hidden bases. When their orbital defenses fell, they began broadcasting messages across the galaxy. Not pleas for mercy, but warnings to other species about the true nature of the Galactic Council's peaceful expansion. They cost us over 200 ships, Vex said, his voice trembling with rage. 200 ships to conquer one primitive world. And even now, 6 months later, they continue to resist. They have turned their entire planet into a fortress. Every city, every town, every settlement has become a potential battleground. The display showed images of Earth's surface. The humans had transformed their world with remarkable speed. Cities were now surrounded by massive defensive walls. Skyscrapers had been converted into weapons platforms bristling with missile launchers and energy cannons reverse-engineered from captured Galactic Navy equipment. Even their children carried weapons and knew how to fight. We need something that will break their spirit, Vex continued. Something that will make them understand that resistance is futile. Something that will make them beg for mercy. Karath understood now why they had brought him here. His reputation was known throughout the galaxy, a legend built on the ruins of conquered worlds. He was not just a weapon. He was a symbol of inevitable defeat, a harbinger of doom that crushed the will to fight before the battle even began. You want me to break them, Karath said. It was not a question. Yes, Vex replied. We will drop you on their planet with a small escort force. You will demonstrate what true power looks like. You will show them what happens to those who defy the Galactic Council. And when they're broken and begging for mercy, we will accept their surrender and add another world to our empire. Karath considered this. The prospect of battle called to something deep within his predator's soul, something that 3 years of captivity had not been able to suppress. But there was something else, something in the way these humans had fought that intrigued him. They reminded him of his own people in the early days of the Draknari Empire, before they had grown soft and complacent. What do I get in return? He asked. Your freedom, Vex said immediately. Complete your mission, break the human resistance, and you will be released. We will even provide you with a ship and enough supplies to reach the Outer Rim territories. It was a lie, of course. Karath could smell the deception on the Admiral like the stench of rotting meat. They would never willingly release him. But that did not matter. He had been planning his escape for months, and this mission would provide the perfect opportunity. I accept, he said. The chains that held him began to retract into the walls, and for the first time in 3 years, Karath felt the weight of freedom on his limbs. He stretched slowly, feeling his muscles respond after so long in captivity. His body was still strong, still ready for war. Excellent, Vex said, stepping back as Karath rose to his full height. We will begin the descent immediately. Your target is a human city called Denver, located in the central region of the largest continent. Intelligence suggests it is a major population center and military stronghold. Breaking it should serve as an example to the rest of their species. Karath nodded, already thinking about the battle to come. It had been too long since he had felt the thrill of conquest, the satisfaction of seeing his enemies flee before his might. These humans would learn what every other species had learned, that resistance to the Galactic Council was not just futile, but ultimately suicidal. The transport bay of the Crimson Fong was a cavern of metal and machinery filled with the tools of war. Karath's escort force was already assembled. 50 of the Council's elite shock troopers, armed with plasma rifles and wearing powered armor that could shrug off most conventional weapons. They were veterans of a dozen campaigns, each one chosen for their loyalty and their willingness to follow orders without question. At the center of the bay sat Karath's personal war machine, a massive suit of powered armor that had been built specifically for his unique physiology. The suit stood nearly 4 meters tall, its surface covered in weapons systems and defensive technologies that represented the pinnacle of Galactic Council engineering. It was painted in the deep red and black of the Draknari Empire, a reminder of his former status and power. The Devastator armor has been modified with additional weapon systems, a technician explained as Karath approached. Plasma cannons, missile pods, energy shields, and a personal teleporter for rapid battlefield repositioning. You will be functionally invincible against any technology the humans possess. Korath ran his clawed hands over the armor's surface, feeling the familiar tingle of advanced technology responding to his presence. The suit's neural interface would link directly with his nervous system, turning him into a one-being army capable of leveling entire city blocks. "Time to deployment?" he asked. 20 minutes, the technician replied. "The humans have detected our approach and are mobilizing their defenses. Long-range sensors show significant military activity in and around the target city." Perfect. Korath preferred it when his enemies had time to prepare. It made their inevitable defeat all the more crushing to their morale. The humans would throw everything they had at him, and when their best weapons proved useless, their spirit would finally break. The armor closed around him like a second skin, its systems coming online with a soft hum of power. Heads-up displays filled his vision with tactical information, target acquisition systems locked onto potential threats, and weapon systems ran through their startup sequences. He was no longer just Korath the Destroyer. He was become death itself, a force of nature given form and purpose. The transport ship Harbinger was smaller than the Crimson Fong, but faster and more maneuverable. It would carry him and his escort force down to the planet's surface while the main fleet remained in orbit, ready to provide fire support if needed. Not that it would be needed. Korath had never required backup to complete a mission. As the ship entered Earth's atmosphere, Korath studied the planet through the tactical displays. It was beautiful in its own way, with vast oceans and sprawling continents covered in green vegetation. The humans had built their cities with an eye for aesthetics as well as function, creating structures that seemed to blend with the natural landscape rather than dominating it. A pity that most of it would be destroyed before the day was over. "Target city in sight," the pilot announced. Beginning final approach vector. Denver spread out below them like a glittering jewel, its towers reaching toward the sky in defiance of gravity and common sense. But even from this height, Korath could see the preparations the humans had made for war. The city bristled with defensive positions, anti-aircraft weapons, and what appeared to be massive kinetic launchers capable of hurling projectiles into orbit. They learned quickly, Korath admitted with grudging respect, but not quickly enough. The human defensive fire began as soon as the Harbinger came within range. Missiles streaked up from the city below, their primitive guidance systems locked onto the transport ship. The pilot began evasive maneuvers, but the humans had learned to anticipate such tactics. Several missiles found their mark, but the ship's shields held against the relatively weak explosions. "Drop zone approaching," the pilot called out. 30 seconds to deployment. Korath felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came before battle. His weapon systems armed themselves automatically. Target acquisition systems began cataloging potential threats, and his enhanced senses expanded to take in every detail of the approaching battlefield. This was what he had been born for, this moment of perfect clarity before the chaos of combat began. The transport ship's cargo bay opened, and Korath stepped into empty air 3 kilometers above the city of Denver. The Devastator armor's flight systems engaged immediately, slowing his descent to a controlled fall that would bring him down in the center of the city's defensive perimeter. Below him, he could see the humans scrambling to respond to his arrival. Military vehicles raced through the streets, weapons platforms swiveled to track his descent, and thousands of soldiers took up positions in buildings and behind barricades. They were brave, he had to give them that. But bravery alone would not save them from what was coming. Korath struck the ground in the center of Denver's main plaza with enough force to shatter the pavement in a spider web of cracks extending for 50 meters in every direction. The impact crater was 3 meters deep, and dust and debris filled the air around him as he rose to his full height. The humans did not waste time on demands for surrender or attempts at communication. They opened fire immediately with everything they had: assault rifles, machine guns, rocket-propelled grenades, and even some captured Galactic Council energy weapons. The storm of projectiles that converged on Karath's position would have been enough to level a small building. None of it mattered. The Devastator armor's shields flared to life, deflecting or absorbing every attack the humans could throw at him. Bullets bounced off harmlessly, explosives were absorbed by the energy barriers, and even the captured energy weapons barely caused the shield generators to fluctuate. Karath stood motionless in the center of the firestorm for exactly 10 seconds, allowing the humans to empty their weapons and realize the futility of their situation. Then he began to fight back. His first target was a human tank that had positioned itself at the end of the plaza. The vehicle was primitive by Galactic Council standards, but Karath could recognize the workmanship that had gone into its construction. The humans had built it to last, with thick armor and a powerful main gun that might actually pose a threat to lesser opponents. Karath's plasma cannon charged with a whine of building energy, then discharged in a bolt of superheated matter that struck the tank dead center. The vehicle simply ceased to exist, vaporized so completely that not even scrap metal remained. The psychological effect on the human defenders was immediate and devastating. Karath could hear their communications through the armor's sensor systems, could taste their fear as it began to overcome their courage. Some of them began to fall back, but others stood their ground and continued firing. These humans were definitely different from other species he had conquered. Most civilized races would have surrendered the moment they realized their weapons were ineffective. The humans seemed determined to fight to the last soldier, even when victory was impossible. Karath began to move forward, each step bringing him closer to the heart of the human defenses. His weapon systems acquired targets with mechanical precision, gun emplacements, missile launchers, command vehicles, and concentrations of enemy troops. The Devastator armor's arsenal began to speak in voices of thunder and lightning. Plasma bolts lanced out to destroy buildings that had been converted into fortresses. Micromissiles streaked through the air to eliminate human snipers and heavy weapons teams. Energy beams carved through defensive barriers like they were made of paper. And through it all, Karath advanced with the inexorable certainty of an avalanche. The human resistance began to crumble as their defensive positions were systematically eliminated. But instead of surrendering, they fell back to secondary positions deeper in the city. Instead of accepting defeat, they adapted their tactics to try to find some weakness in his defenses. It was futile, of course, but Karath found himself developing a grudging respect for their determination. The battle raged for 2 hours as Karath carved a path of destruction through the heart of Denver. He had reached the city center, where the humans had concentrated their remaining forces around what appeared to be a government building. The structure was massive and heavily fortified, with thick walls and multiple defensive positions. It was also, Karath realized, where they were making their final stand. He paused at the edge of the plaza that surrounded the building, studying the human defensive positions through his tactical systems. They had perhaps 200 soldiers left, armed with a mixture of primitive and captured weapons. They had also constructed some kind of energy barrier around the building, crude by Galactic Council standards, but showing an impressive understanding of advanced physics for such a primitive species. "Attention, alien warrior," a human voice called out through speakers mounted on the building's walls. The translator in Karath's armor converted the primitive language into something he could understand. "I am General Sarah Mitchell, commanding officer of the Denver Defense Force. I would like to speak with you." Karath considered simply destroying the building and everyone in it. It would be the fastest way to complete his mission. But something about the human's tone made him pause. There was no fear in her voice, no desperation. She spoke like someone who still believed she could win. "Speak," Karath replied, his armor's external speakers amplifying his voice to thunderous proportions. "You fight well," the general said. "Better than any warrior I have ever seen. But this battle is pointless. Even if you kill every defender in this city, it will not break humanity's will to resist. We do not surrender, alien. We do not kneel, and we do not forgive. Your species will learn," Karath replied. As every other species has learned, resistance is futile. Surrender is inevitable. I am the instrument of your defeat. No, the general said, and there was something like amusement in her voice. You are not our defeat. You are our teacher. Before Karath could ask what she meant, new contacts appeared on his sensor displays. Human aircraft were approaching from multiple directions. Not the primitive jet fighters he had been expecting, but something else entirely. These craft moved too fast and maneuvered too precisely to be conventional aircraft. They were using Galactic Council technology. The first energy beam struck Karath's shields and actually made them flicker. The second beam was stronger, forcing his defensive systems to redistribute power from his weapons. By the time the third and fourth aircraft joined the attack, Karath realized that the humans had done more than just capture and reverse engineer alien technology. They had improved it. The battle that followed was unlike anything Karath had experienced in his long career as a destroyer of worlds. The humans attacked him from multiple directions simultaneously, using tactics that seemed to anticipate his every move. When he tried to target one aircraft, two others would attack from his blind spots. When he attempted to use his teleporter to reposition, they were already waiting for him. But most disturbing of all was the realization that they were learning from his attacks. Each time he used a particular weapon or tactic, their response became more effective. They were adapting to his capabilities in real time, something that should have been impossible for a species that had never encountered Galactic Council technology before 6 months ago. The engagement lasted for another hour before Karath was forced to admit something he had never thought possible. He was losing. His shields were down to 30% power. His weapon systems were overheating, and his mobility was compromised by damage to the armor's flight systems. The humans had not managed to seriously injure him, but they had done something far worse. They had proven that he was not invincible. As if sensing his realization, the human aircraft pulled back to a safe distance. The voice of General Mitchell came through his speakers again, and this time there was no mistaking the note of triumph in her tone. Surrender, alien. You have fought well, but the battle is over. Lay down your arms, and we promise you will be treated with honor. Karath looked around at the devastation he had wrought. Entire city blocks lay in ruins. Fires burned throughout the urban landscape, and the body count was climbing into the thousands. By any reasonable measure, he had won a decisive victory. So why did it feel like defeat? I do not surrender, he replied, powering up his remaining weapons for one final assault. I am Karath the Destroyer. I have conquered worlds and broken empires. I will not be defeated by primitives. But even as he spoke the words, Karath knew they were hollow. Something fundamental had changed during this battle. For the first time in his life, he had encountered an enemy that refused to accept the reality of their own defeat. These humans fought like they had nothing to lose and everything to gain. The final phase of the battle began as Karath charged toward the government building, determined to complete his mission even if it cost him his life. But as he reached the steps of the structure, something impossible happened. A small figure emerged from the building's entrance and walked calmly toward him. It was a human child, no more than 10 or 12 years old by their species standards. The young human wore simple clothes and carried no weapons. They appeared to be completely unafraid as they approached the most feared warrior in known space. Karath's weapon systems locked onto the child automatically, but something stayed his hand. He had killed many enemies in his long career, but he had never deliberately targeted noncombatants. There were lines that even a destroyer of worlds did not cross. The child stopped just outside the range of Karath's massive claws and looked up at him with bright, curious eyes. Hello, the child said in clear, unaccented galactic standard. My name is Emma. What's your name? For the first time in over a century, Karath found himself completely speechless. Karath stared down at the small human child, his massive frame frozen in confusion. In all his centuries of warfare, across dozens of conquered worlds, nothing had prepared him for this moment. The child stood before him without fear, without weapons, without even the instinctive terror that most species showed when confronted with his presence. "My name is Emma," the child repeated patiently, as if speaking to a friend rather than to the most feared warrior in the galaxy. "What's your name?" The question echoed in Karatha's mind like a puzzle he could not solve. Names had power among his people. To give one's true name to an enemy was to grant them a weapon that could be used against you. Yet something about this small human made such concerns seem foolish. "I am Karath," he found himself saying, his voice softer than he intended. Emma smiled, and the expression transformed her entire face. "That's a pretty name. Are you here to hurt people, Karath?" The directness of the question caught him off guard. Most civilized species approach such topics with layers of diplomacy and misdirection. But this child spoke with a simple honesty that seemed to characterize her entire species. "Yes," he admitted, though the word felt strange in his mouth. "Why?" Emma asked, tilting her head to one side. Karatha's weapon systems remained locked onto dozens of targets around the plaza. His tactical displays continued to track the human aircraft circling overhead, and his comm systems monitored the increasingly frantic communications from the Galactic Council fleet in orbit. But all of that seemed distant and unimportant compared to the simple question posed by this small human. "Because that is what I do," he said finally. "I'm a destroyer of worlds. It is my nature. But you chose to stop when you saw me," Emma pointed out with the relentless logic of childhood. "That means you can choose not to hurt people too." Before Karath could respond, General Mitchell's voice crackled through his comm system. "Emma, get back inside immediately. That's an order." The child looked over her shoulder toward the government building where dozens of human soldiers waited with weapons trained on Karath. "It's okay, General Mitchell. Karath isn't going to hurt me. Are you, Karath?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Karatha's targeting systems identified 17 different ways he could eliminate the child in less than a second. His mission parameters demanded that he break the human resistance by any means necessary. But something deeper than programming, older than his conditioning as a weapon, rebelled against the very idea. "No," he said quietly. "I will not hurt you." Emma's smile grew wider. "I knew you were nice. You have kind eyes." Kind eyes. The phrase repeated itself in Karatha's mind like an echo. No one had ever called any part of him kind. Terrible, yes. Fearsome, certainly. Merciless, without question. But kind? The concept seemed to exist in a language he had never learned to speak. "You should go inside," Karath said, gesturing toward the building with one massive claw. "This is a battlefield. It is not safe for younglings." "It's not safe for you either," Emma replied with a matter-of-fact tone that children use when stating obvious truths. "Those ships up there want to hurt you. I can see it in their flying patterns." Karatha's head snapped up to check his tactical displays. The child was right. The human aircraft had been repositioning themselves for another attack run, but he had been so focused on the conversation that he had failed to notice the threat. How had a young human with no apparent military training been able to read tactical movements that had escaped his attention? "You are observant," he said with genuine respect. "My dad taught me to watch how people move when they're angry or scared," Emma explained. "He said it could keep me safe. But you're not moving like you're angry anymore. You were when you first got here, but now you just seem confused." The accuracy of her assessment was unsettling. Karath had spent the first part of the battle fueled by the familiar rage of combat, the predator's joy of overwhelming weaker prey. But talking to this child had somehow drained that anger away, leaving behind something he could not name. "Where is your father?" Karath asked. Emma's expression grew sad. "He died fighting your people when they first came to Earth. He was a pilot in the first battle. But before he died, he made me promise to remember that even enemies can become friends if you try hard enough." The words hit Karath with unexpected force. This child's father had died fighting forces under Galactic Council command, yet she showed no hatred toward him. Instead, she seemed to be actively trying to find some connection between them. "I'm sorry for your loss," Karath said, and was surprised to discover that he meant it. "Thank you," Emma replied solemnly. That's very kind of you to say. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. General Mitchell emerged from the government building, moving slowly with her hands visible and empty. The woman was perhaps 40 years old by human standards, with graying hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Her uniform was torn and stained with smoke from the battle, but she carried herself with quiet dignity. "Emma," the general said gently, "you need to come inside now. This is dangerous." "But Karath is nice," Emma protested. "He's just confused about what he's supposed to do." General Mitchell studied Karath with eyes that missed nothing. "Is that true? Are you confused about your mission?" Karath considered the question seriously. His orders were clear: break the human resistance by any means necessary. But those orders had been given by people who viewed the humans as just another primitive species to be absorbed into the Galactic Council's empire. They had not anticipated encountering a people who could look at their greatest enemy and see potential for friendship. "Perhaps," he admitted. "Then, maybe we can help," the general said. "Would you be willing to discuss terms?" "Terms?" Karatha's confusion was genuine. "I do not understand." "Negotiations," General Mitchell clarified. "A way for both sides to get what they want without more killing." The concept was not entirely foreign to Karath. He had seen other species attempt to negotiate when faced with overwhelming force. But those negotiations had always followed the same pattern. The weaker side would offer tribute or territory in exchange for their lives. The humans seemed to be suggesting something different. "What could you possibly offer that I would want?" he asked. Emma stepped forward before the general could respond. "We could offer you a home," she said simply. "You look lonely." Once again, the child's directness left Karath speechless. Lonely. The word described something he had never admitted to himself, a hollow space inside his chest that no amount of conquest had ever been able to fill. He had told himself it was the satisfaction of victory he craved, the thrill of proving his superiority over weaker opponents. But what if it had really been connection he was seeking all along? "I have no home," he said quietly. "My people cast me out when I became too powerful for them to control. The Galactic Council views me as a tool to be used and discarded. I am alone by choice and by necessity." "But you don't have to be," Emma said, taking a step closer. "We could be your friends. We're good at being friends with people who are different from us." Karath looked around the devastated plaza, at the burning buildings and the body count his rampage had created. "I have killed your people. I have destroyed your city. Why would you offer friendship to your enemy?" "Because that's what friends do," Emma replied with the absolute certainty of childhood faith. "They help each other become better than they were before." General Mitchell nodded slowly. "The child speaks truth, though perhaps more simply than I would have phrased it. Humanity has learned that former enemies often make the strongest allies. We have a history of turning conflict into cooperation when both sides are willing to try." Karatha's tactical systems continued to monitor the approaching human aircraft, but his attention was focused entirely on the conversation taking place in the rubble of what had been Denver's main plaza. Something fundamental was shifting in his understanding of the universe, like tectonic plates moving deep beneath the surface of a world. "What would such friendship require of me?" he asked. "That depends," General Mitchell replied. "What do you want from your life? What would make you happy?" Another question that had never occurred to him. Happiness was not a concept that warriors were supposed to consider. Victory was its own reward, and defeat was to be avoided at all costs. But happiness? The idea seemed as foreign as the notion of kindness. "I have never considered happiness as a goal," he admitted. "Then maybe it's time to start," Emma said with a smile. "What did you like to do before you became a destroyer of worlds?" The question transported Karath back across the centuries to memories he had not accessed in decades. He remembered being young on the homeworld of his people before the wars and the exile. He had been curious about other species, fascinated by the diversity of life in the galaxy. He had wanted to explore, to learn, to discover new forms of beauty among the stars. When had that curiosity been transformed into rage? When had wonder become the desire to dominate? I wanted to explore, he said slowly, to see new worlds and meet new forms of life, to learn from them. That sounds wonderful, Emma said with genuine enthusiasm. We could show you Earth. There's so many beautiful places here, and so many different kinds of people. You could be an explorer again instead of a destroyer. The offer hung in the air between them like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Karath found himself wanting to reach for it, to grasp this possibility of redemption that the humans seemed to be offering. But the rational part of his mind rejected such thoughts as impossible. The Galactic Council would never allow it, he said. I'm their prisoner. When this mission is complete, they will find some excuse to eliminate me. They fear my power too much to let me live free. Then, don't complete the mission, Emma suggested with the straightforward logic of childhood. Stay here with us instead. It is not that simple, youngling. The Council has ways of enforcing obedience. If I refuse to carry out their orders, they will simply activate the control implants in my nervous system and force me to comply. General Mitchell's expression sharpened with interest. Control implants? Are you saying you're not acting of your own free will? Karath nodded grimly. The implants were installed during my capture. They allow the Council to override my conscious mind and force my body to obey their commands. I have been fighting their influence throughout this battle, but they will eventually activate them if I do not complete my objectives. That's terrible, Emma said, her young face filled with sympathy. It's like being a puppet instead of a person. Yes, Karath agreed, surprised by how accurately the child had captured his situation. It is exactly like that. But we could help you, General Mitchell said, her tactical mind already working on the problem. Our medical technology has advanced considerably since we began studying captured Galactic Council equipment. We might be able to remove or disable the implants. Hope flickered in Karath's chest like a small flame, threatening to catch fire. You would do that? For me? After what I have done? Everyone deserves the chance to choose their own path, the general replied firmly. No one should be forced to be something they don't want to be. Their conversation was interrupted by a new voice speaking through Karath's comm system. Admiral Vex's cold tones cut through the air like a blade. Karath, what is the cause of this delay? My sensors show that the human resistance has not been broken. Complete your mission immediately or face the consequences. Karath felt the familiar tingle in his nervous system that warned of the control implants beginning to activate. He had perhaps minutes before they would override his consciousness entirely. I need time, he said urgently to General Mitchell. Can your medical teams work quickly? We have a field surgery unit standing by, she replied, already speaking in her radio. But we'll need you to power down your armor systems and trust us completely. Trust. Another concept that had been foreign to Karath for longer than he could remember. Trust required vulnerability, and vulnerability was something that destroyers of worlds could not afford. But, looking into Emma's earnest young face, he found himself willing to take that risk. I will trust you, he said, beginning the shutdown sequence for his armor systems. As the Devastator armor powered down around him, Karath felt more exposed than he had since his capture by the Galactic Council. Without the suit's protective systems, he was still formidable, but no longer invincible. He was placing his life in the hands of people he had been trying to kill just hours earlier. The human medical team moved with impressive efficiency, wheeling sophisticated equipment across the plaza despite the ongoing threat from the Council fleet overhead. Dr. Sarah Chun, the team leader, was a small woman with steady hands and calm eyes who showed no fear as she approached the most dangerous being in known space. We'll need to access the base of your skull, she explained, pulling up holographic displays that showed the location of the implants. The procedure is delicate, but not beyond our capabilities. However, you need to understand that once we begin, there's no going back. Admiral Vex will know what we're doing. Let him know, Karath replied grimly. I'm tired of being a puppet. As Dr. Chun and her team began their work, Emma stayed close by his side. The child seemed to understand instinctively that he needed the reassurance of a friendly presence during this vulnerable moment. Tell me about your homeworld, she said softly. What was it like before the wars? Karath found himself describing memories he had not shared with anyone for decades. His homeworld had been beautiful, with vast crystalline forests that sang in harmony with the wind. His people had been warriors, yes, but also artists and philosophers. They had built cities that were as much sculptures as they were functional spaces. It sounds magical, Emma said with wonder in her voice. I'd love to see places like that someday. Perhaps you will, Karath replied. If I survive this procedure, if the Council does not destroy us both, perhaps I could show you the wonders that still exist among the stars. The conversation was interrupted by alarms from the orbiting fleet. Admiral Vex's voice cut through the comm channels with barely controlled rage. Karath, what are you doing? My sensors detect unauthorized medical procedures. Cease immediately, or I will activate the implants at full power. Dr. Chen's hands never paused in their delicate work. Almost there, she murmured. Just a few more seconds. Do it, Emma said fiercely. Don't let them control you anymore. Karath felt the control implants beginning to activate, sending waves of compulsion through his nervous system. The urge to stand up, to push the medical team away, to resume his mission of destruction was almost overwhelming. But Emma's small hand found his massive claw and squeezed with surprising strength. Fight it, she whispered. You're stronger than they are. With a sound like breaking chains, Dr. Chun extracted the first control implant. The relief was immediate and profound, as if a weight that Karath had carried for so long that he had forgotten its presence had suddenly been lifted from his shoulders. One down, two to go, Dr. Chun said grimly. Admiral Vex's voice had risen to a shriek of fury. Impossible. Those implants cannot be removed by primitive medical technology. Karath, respond immediately. But for the first time in 3 years, Karath did not have to respond to anyone. The second and third implants were extracted in quick succession, and with each removal, he felt more like himself and less like a weapon designed by others. It's done, Dr. Chen announced, stepping back from her work. You're free. Free. The word echoed in Karath's mind like a prayer answered after a lifetime of silence. He was no longer bound by the Galactic Council's commands, no longer forced to be an instrument of their will. For the first time since his capture, he was truly himself. Thank you, he said to Dr. Chun, then turned to Emma and General Mitchell. Thank you all. Emma beamed up at him. So now you get to choose. What do you want to do? Karath stood slowly, feeling the weight of genuine choice for the first time in years. Above them, the Galactic Council fleet was beginning to move, no doubt preparing for orbital bombardment now that their weapon had been turned against them. The humans around him were preparing for what would likely be their final battle. But for the first time in his long life, Karath knew exactly what he wanted to do. I want to protect my friends, he said, his voice carrying absolute certainty. Emma's face lit up with joy. You really mean it? We're friends. Yes, youngling, Karath replied, feeling something warm and unfamiliar spreading through his chest. We are friends, and I will not let anyone harm you. General Mitchell smiled grimly as she raised her radio. All units, this is Mitchell. The alien is now fighting with us, not against us. Repeat, Karath is now friendly. Adjust targeting accordingly. As the Galactic Council fleet began its bombardment, Karath looked up at the sky with new purpose. He was no longer a destroyer of worlds. He was their protector, and he would show Admiral Vex and the entire Galactic Council what happened to those who threatened his newfound family. The real battle was just beginning. The first orbital bombardment struck Denver's eastern districts with the force of a small star. Buildings that had stood for centuries were reduced to glowing craters in seconds, and the shockwave rattled windows 20 kilometers away. Admiral Vex was no longer playing games. He intended to level the entire city rather than risk losing control of his most valuable weapon. Karath felt the impact through the soles of his feet as he stood in the plaza, Emma's small hand still clutching one of his massive claws. The child should have been terrified by the display of destructive power raining down from orbit, but She simply looked up at him with absolute trust. "Can you stop them?" she asked with the directness that he was beginning to associate with her species. "Yes," Karath replied, his voice carrying a certainty he felt in his bones. "But first, we need to get you and the other humans to safety." General Mitchell was already coordinating the evacuation through a radio, but Karath could see the mathematical impossibility of the situation playing out on his tactical displays. The humans had bunkers and underground facilities, but nothing that could withstand a sustained orbital bombardment. Admiral Vex would simply methodically destroy the city block by block until nothing remained alive. "The underground transit tunnels," Dr. Chen suggested, overhearing their conversation. "They're deep enough to provide some protection, and they connect to the mountain facilities outside the city." "It would take hours to evacuate everyone," General Mitchell replied grimly. "We don't have hours." Karath studied the tactical situation with the mind of someone who had conquered dozens of worlds. The human defensive positions were impressive for a primitive species, but they were designed to fight ground-based opponents. Against orbital bombardment, they were useless. But Karath was not bound by human limitations. "I can buy you time," he said, beginning to power up the Devastator armor's flight systems. "But you must get Emma and the civilians to safety immediately." "What are you going to do?" Emma asked, though from her expression, she already suspected the answer. "What I was made to do," Karath replied. "But this time I choose my own target." The armor systems came online with their familiar hum of barely contained energy. Karath had worn this suit through battles on a dozen worlds, but it had never felt as right as it did now. For the first time, he was not being forced to fight. He was choosing to protect something that mattered to him. "You can't fight an entire fleet by yourself," General Mitchell protested. "It's suicide." "Perhaps," Karath admitted. "But I am no longer concerned with my own survival. I am concerned with yours." Emma tugged on his armored hand, demanding his attention. When he looked down, her young face was filled with fierce determination. "You promised we were friends," she said. "Friends don't abandon each other. We'll find another way." The simple faith in her voice almost broke something inside Karath's chest. This small human child was willing to stake her life on the belief that friendship could overcome impossible odds. It was naive and illogical and completely contrary to everything Karath had learned about the nature of the universe. It was also, he realized, the most courageous thing he had ever witnessed. "You are right, youngling," he said softly. "Friends do not abandon each other, so we will find another way together." Before anyone could ask what he meant, Karath opened his armor's communication channels and broadcast on every frequency used by the Galactic Council fleet. "Admiral Vex," his voice boomed across the radio spectrum. "This is Karath. I challenge you to single combat." The orbital bombardment ceased immediately as every ship in the fleet focused on the unexpected transmission. After a moment of stunned silence, Admiral Vex's voice crackled through the comm system with barely controlled fury. "You dare challenge me, you primitive beast? You forget your place. You are a weapon, not a warrior. You have no right to issue challenges." "I'm no longer your weapon," Karath replied calmly. "The control implants have been removed. I am free to choose my own path, and I choose to protect these humans. Face me in honorable combat, or be known throughout the galaxy as a coward who hides behind the deaths of innocents." The challenge rang out across open channels that were monitored by every major power in known space. By invoking the ancient laws of single combat, Karath had effectively forced Admiral Vex into a corner. To refuse would mark him as a coward in the eyes of every civilization that still honored the old ways. Emma looked up at him with worry in her young eyes. "What if he says yes? What if he's stronger than you?" "Then I will lose," Karath admitted. "But even in losing, I will have given you and your people time to escape. And I will have chosen to fall as a friend rather than succeed as an enemy." General Mitchell was already coordinating with her staff to begin the evacuation, but she paused to study Karath with new understanding. "You're not doing this just to buy us time, are you?" You're doing it because you've never had the chance to fight for something you believed in. The accuracy of her assessment surprised him. You see clearly for a human. We have to, she replied grimly. It's how we've survived this long, against impossible odds. Admiral Vex's response came after several minutes of consultation with the Council's high command. When he spoke, his voice carried the cold formality of official pronouncement. Very well, Beast. I accept your challenge. The terms are as follows. Single combat between us, with no outside interference. The winner claims the right to determine the fate of this world. Combat will take place in neutral space between the fleet and the planet's surface. Agreed. Karath replied immediately. But Admiral Vex continued with obvious satisfaction. Since you are no longer equipped with Council technology, I will provide you with a suit of powered armor equivalent to my own. We will meet as equals in all respects save skill and determination. Emma frowned. That doesn't sound fair. He's trying to trick you somehow. Karath nodded grimly. The Admiral was indeed planning some form of deception. The offer of equivalent equipment was too generous to be genuine. But the challenge had already been issued and accepted according to the ancient laws. To withdraw now would bring dishonor not just to himself, but to the humans he had sworn to protect. I accept these terms, he said formally. Within the hour, a small council transport descended from orbit carrying the promised armor. The suit that emerged from its cargo bay was indeed equivalent to Karath's Devastator armor in most respects. Similar weapons loadout, comparable defensive systems, and identical power outputs. But as Karath examined the equipment, he began to understand Admiral Vex's true plan. The neural interface has been modified, Dr. Chun observed, running scans on the armor's control systems. It's designed for Alterian physiology, not Draknari. You'll be fighting with equipment that wasn't built for your nervous system. It will be like trying to use your left hand to do right-hand work, General Mitchell added with concern. Possible, but inefficient. Karath had expected as much. Admiral Vex was many things, but he was not foolish enough to give a genuine advantage to his opponent. The modified armor would be functional, but clumsy in Karath's hands, while the Admiral would be using equipment perfectly suited to his own capabilities. It does not matter, Karath said as he began the process of interfacing with the unfamiliar systems. I have fought with inferior equipment before. Emma watched the preparations with growing anxiety. What if you lose? She asked quietly. What happens to us then? If I lose, Karath replied honestly, Admiral Vex will likely order the complete destruction of your world as an example to other species that might consider resistance. But I do not intend to lose. How can you be so sure? Karath paused in his equipment checks to look down at the small human child who had somehow become the center of his universe in the span of a few hours. Because I have something to fight for that is worth more than my own life, he said simply. That makes all the difference. The journey to the combat zone took place in tense silence. Karath rode alone in a small human transport, while Emma and the others monitored from the command bunker deep beneath Denver. The modified armor felt wrong in dozens of subtle ways. Response times that were fractionally slower than he expected, weapons that required different trigger pressures, and defensive systems that activated with unfamiliar timing. Admiral Vex was waiting for him in the designated neutral zone, suspended in the void between Earth and the Galactic Council fleet. The Altarian's armor was a work of art as much as military equipment, its sleek lines and elegant proportions reflecting the aesthetic sensibilities of his species. But Karath could see the weapons bristling beneath its sophisticated exterior. Plasma cannons, missile pods, energy shields, and closed combat systems that would make their duel a deadly dance of destruction. So, Admiral Vex said through the comm system, his cultured voice carrying undertones of satisfaction. The beast finally reveals its true nature. You have abandoned your duty to the Council for the sake of primitive aliens who see you as nothing more than a useful monster. They see me as a friend, Karath replied, checking his weapon systems one final time. It is a perspective that I find refreshing. Friend, Admiral Vex laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. You are a destroyer, Karath. It is what you were born to be, what you were trained to become, what you will always remain. These humans may amuse you for now, but eventually you will grow bored with their weakness and return to your true nature. Perhaps, Karath admitted, but today I choose to be more than what I was born to be. The formal combat began without ceremony. One moment they were talking, and the next they were trying to kill each other with the focused intensity that only comes from generations of military training. Admiral Vex moved with the fluid grace of a natural pilot, his armor responding to his commands like an extension of his own body. His attacks were precise and economical, designed to probe for weaknesses while conserving energy for sustained combat. He was, Karath realized, an excellent warrior in his own right. But he had never faced anyone like Karath. The destroyer's approach to combat was fundamentally different from anything taught in the Council's military academies. Where Vex sought precision, Karath embodied overwhelming force. Where the Admiral tried to outmaneuver his opponent, Karath simply smashed through whatever stood in his way. Their first exchange lit up the void between planet and fleet with the flash of energy weapons and the brilliant flare of defensive shields absorbing massive impacts. Karath's unfamiliar armor hampered his responses, but he compensated with the raw aggression that had made him feared across the galaxy. "You fight like an animal," Admiral Vex observed, launching a salvo of micro-missiles that Karath barely managed to intercept. "Animals are honest about what they are," Karath replied, closing to melee range with a burst from his flight systems. "They do not pretend to be civilized while committing genocide." The Admiral's response was a plasma blast that would have vaporized a lesser opponent. Karath's shields absorbed most of the impact, but the unfamiliar energy distribution systems left him momentarily vulnerable. Vex pressed his advantage, raining fire from multiple weapon systems in a display of coordinated destruction. But Karath had faced worse odds before. On the mining world of Kepler 442b, he had fought 3 Council dreadnoughts simultaneously and emerged victorious. On the garden world of New Eden, he had broken an entire army using nothing but stolen equipment and tactical cunning. He was, regardless of what his enemies chose to believe, far more than simply a beast with powerful weapons. The battle raged across several cubic kilometers of space, each combatant using every trick they had learned over decades of warfare. Admiral Vex employed sophisticated tactics drawn from the Council's best military minds, while Karath relied on the savage cunning that had made him the most feared warrior in known space. But as the fight wore on, Karath began to realize that something was wrong. His opponent was fighting too conservatively, holding back reserves of power that should have been committed to achieving victory. It was as if the Admiral was more concerned with prolonging the battle than winning it. The answer came to him in a flash of tactical insight that sent ice through his veins. Admiral Vex was stalling for time. Time for the fleet to complete some secondary objective while the galaxy's attention was focused on their duel. "You never intended to fight seriously," Karath said, his voice cutting through the calm chatter between the watching fleets. Admiral Vex's laughter confirmed his suspicions. "Very good, Beast. Yes, this entire engagement has been a distraction. While you and I dance in the void, my ships have been deploying quantum torpedoes around your precious planet. Weapons that will sterilize the entire biosphere regardless of who wins our little duel." Horror filled Karath's mind as he processed the implications. Quantum torpedoes were planet-killer weapons, designed to destabilize the fundamental forces that held matter together. Once deployed and activated, they would turn Earth into a cloud of component atoms in a matter of hours. "The old laws forbid such tactics during single combat," Karath protested. "The old laws are for the old civilizations," Admiral Vex replied coldly. "The Council has evolved beyond such primitive concepts as honor and fair play. We take what we want when we want it, and we destroy whatever resists us." Emma's voice crackled through Karath's comm system, transmitted from the command bunker far below. "Karath, what's happening? Our sensors are detecting something wrong with the enemy ships." He could not bring himself to tell her, could not find words to explain that his challenge had been turned against the very people he had sought to protect. But he could still act. Instead of continuing the formal duel, Karath turned away from Admiral Vex and began racing toward the nearest Council ship at maximum acceleration. If he could destroy the vessels deploying the quantum torpedoes, he might still save Earth. "Coward!" Admiral Vex called after him. "You abandon honorable combat to pursue futile gestures." "I abandon nothing," Karath replied grimly. "I simply choose a more worthy target." The race that followed tested every limit of Karath's piloting skills and his armor's capabilities. Admiral Vex pursued him with relentless determination, firing everything in his arsenal to prevent Karath from reaching the fleet. Meanwhile, the Council ships began deploying their own defensive systems, filling space with energy barriers and automated weapons platforms. But Karath had spent 3 years studying the capabilities and weaknesses of Council technology. He knew where their blind spots were, which systems were vulnerable to overload, and how their defensive formations could be penetrated by a sufficiently motivated attacker. The first Council ship died as Karath's plasma cannon punched through its reactor shielding, turning the entire vessel into a miniature sun. The second fell to a ramming attack that used his armor's mass and velocity to punch a hole clean through its hull. The third managed to launch its torpedo deployment before Karath could stop it, but he destroyed the control systems that would have activated the weapon. By the time Admiral Vex caught up with him, Karath had eliminated 6 ships and damaged 4 others. The quantum torpedo deployment was incomplete, giving Earth's defenders a fighting chance. "Enough!" Admiral Vex screamed, his cultured facade finally cracking to reveal the rage beneath. "I will end this now." The Admiral's armor began to glow with building energy as he activated systems that Karath had not known existed. This was beyond normal combat capabilities. This was something that drew power directly from the ship's reactor core, turning the Admiral into a living weapon of mass destruction. "Override systems engaging," Admiral Vex announced with grim satisfaction. "I will burn you to atoms, beast, and then I will personally oversee the complete destruction of your pathetic human friends." But as the Admiral's weapons reached full charge, Emma's voice cut through the calm static with crystal clarity. "Karath," she said, and there was something in her tone that made him listen despite the mortal danger he faced. "Remember what I told you about watching how people move when they're angry or scared? The Admiral isn't angry anymore. He's terrified. You've already won. You just need to realize it." Suddenly, Karath understood. Admiral Vex's desperate gambit with the override systems was not a sign of strength, but of desperation. The careful, calculated warrior had been replaced by someone making decisions based on fear and wounded pride, and afraid enemies made mistakes. Instead of trying to avoid the Admiral's devastating attack, Karath flew directly toward it. At the last possible second, he used his armor's teleportation system to appear behind his opponent, placing Admiral Vex between himself and the overloaded weapon systems. The Admiral's own attacks struck him in the back, overloading his armor's defensive systems and sending him tumbling through space like a broken toy. Karath's armor had taken significant damage in the exchange, but Admiral Vex was completely helpless. "Surrender," Karath said, training his remaining weapons on his defeated opponent. Admiral Vex's response was a snarl of pure hatred. "I will never surrender to an animal." "Then you will die as one," Karath replied sadly. But before he could fire, Emma's voice stopped him once again. "Don't kill him, Karath. Please, you're better than that now." The plea hung in the space between them like a lifeline. Karath could feel the weight of choice pressing down on him. The choice between the destroyer he had been and the protector he wanted to become. "He will only try again," Karath said. "He will never stop hunting your people." "Maybe," Emma admitted. "But if you kill him now, you'll be doing it because you're angry, not because you have to. And friends don't let friends do things they'll regret later." Wisdom from the mouth of a child. Karath powered down his weapons, and instead activated his armor's tractor beam to hold Admiral Vex in place. "You have lost," he announced on all frequencies. "Withdraw your forces and leave this system immediately, or I will demonstrate why the galaxy fears my name." The threat carried absolute conviction, and the Council fleet began to withdraw within minutes. Admiral Vex had been their most competent commander, and without him, they lacked the tactical expertise to face an enemy of Karatha's caliber. As the last Council ship disappeared into hyperspace, Karath felt something he had never experienced before: the satisfaction of victory without the bitter taste of unnecessary death. He had won not by destroying his enemies, but by becoming something better than they were. And as he flew back toward Earth, toward Emma and his newfound human friends, Karath realized that this was only the beginning of his true journey. 6 months had passed since the battle for Earth, and Karath was beginning to understand what humans meant when they spoke of home. The underground facility beneath the Rocky Mountains had been expanded to accommodate his massive frame, but more importantly, it had been designed to feel welcoming rather than merely functional. The walls were decorated with artwork created by human children, including several pieces by Emma that depicted him not as a fearsome destroyer, but as a gentle giant protecting smaller figures. The transformation had not been easy. Decades of conditioning as a weapon did not disappear overnight, and there were still moments when Karatha's instincts urged him toward violence as the solution to every problem. But Emma and the other humans had shown remarkable patience as he learned new ways of thinking about conflict and cooperation. "You're brooding again," Emma observed as she entered the main chamber where Karath spent most of his time. At 12 years old, she had grown taller over the past months, but she still seemed impossibly small next to his 3-meter frame. "I am thinking," Karath corrected gently. "There is a difference. Not when you get that look on your face," Emma replied with the confidence of someone who had spent months learning to read his expressions. "You only brood like that when you're worried about something bad happening to us." The child's perception continued to amaze him. Emma had developed an almost supernatural ability to understand his moods and motivations, often interpreting his thoughts more clearly than he could himself. "The Galactic Council will return," Karath said, voicing the concern that had been weighing on his mind. Admiral Vex was only the first wave. They will not simply ignore the loss of face that Earth's resistance represents. Emma settled into her usual spot on the ledge beside his workspace, swinging her legs as she considered his words. "So we'll be ready for them. We beat them once, didn't we?" "You beat them because they underestimated you," Karath replied. "They believed you were primitives who would break at the first show of force. But now they know better. Now they know that humanity is dangerous." The truth was more complex than he could easily explain to a child. Over the past 6 months, Karath had been sharing his knowledge of Galactic Council technology and tactics with Earth's military leaders. The humans had proven to be remarkably quick learners, adapting alien technologies to their own purposes and developing strategies that no civilized species had ever attempted. But the Council had resources that dwarfed anything Earth could muster. They controlled hundreds of worlds and could field fleets that blotted out the stars. When they returned, and Karath was certain they would return, they would bring enough firepower to reduce Earth to cosmic dust. "General Mitchell says you've been working on something in the deep labs," Emma said, changing the subject with a subtle skill that all humans seemed to possess. "Something secret." Karath was not surprised that she knew. Emma had a talent for discovering information that others tried to keep hidden, usually through the simple expedient of asking direct questions when adults thought she wasn't listening. "It is not a weapon," he said carefully. "At least, not in the traditional sense." "Can you tell me about it?" Karath considered the request. His project was technically classified at the highest levels of human government, but Emma had proven herself trustworthy beyond any reasonable doubt. More importantly, she had a way of offering insights that no one else seemed capable of providing. "Come," he said, standing and gesturing toward the elevator that would take them to the lower levels. "I will show you." The deep laboratory was a marvel of human and alien technology working in harmony. Banks of computers processed data using algorithms derived from captured council equipment, while holographic displays showed complex mathematical equations that described the fundamental forces of the universe. At the center of it all stood Karath's greatest creation, a device that looked like a sculpture made of crystalline metal and pure energy. "It's beautiful," Emma breathed, her eyes wide with wonder as she stared at the device. "What does it do?" "It is a communication array," Karath explained, his voice filled with pride despite his attempts to remain modest. "But not like any communication system that has ever been built before. Traditional faster-than-light communication used quantum entanglement to transmit information across vast distances instantaneously. But the range was limited, and the equipment required massive amounts of power to maintain stable connections. Karath's device used a completely different approach. Instead of quantum entanglement, it tapped into what human scientists called the zero-point field, the underlying energy that existed in what appeared to be empty space. By modulating fluctuations in this field, the device could transmit information to any point in the galaxy instantaneously and without the power requirements that limited traditional FTL communication. "The Council has always maintained control through information dominance," Karath continued. "They know what is happening throughout their empire because they control the communication networks that connect different star systems. Rebellions fail because they cannot coordinate across interstellar distances." Emma's young mind grasped the implications immediately. "But if people could talk to each other without using council networks, then the Empire's greatest weapon becomes useless," Karath confirmed. "Worlds that have never spoken to each other could share information about council tactics. Resistance movements could coordinate their efforts across hundreds of light years. The oppressed could unite in ways that the council never dreamed possible." The child studied the device with the intense concentration that she brought to any problem that truly interested her. "Have you tested it?" "Small-scale tests have been successful," Karath admitted. "We have established contact with resistance movements on 17 different worlds. But a full activation would require more power than Earth's entire electrical grid can provide." "What would a full activation accomplish?" Karath activated a holographic display that showed the galaxy as a three-dimensional map dotted with thousands of points of light. It would send a message to every inhabited world simultaneously. A message that Earth stands free, that the Council can be defeated, and that others should rise up to claim their own freedom. Emma studied the display with growing excitement. It would be like lighting a signal fire that everyone in the galaxy could see. "Yes," Karath said, pleased by her metaphor. "But it would also make Earth a target for the Council's full military might. They could not allow such a message to spread without responding with overwhelming force. So we'd be trading our safety for the chance to help everyone else gain their freedom," Emma mused. "That is an accurate assessment." Emma was quiet for a long time, her young face serious as she contemplated the implications of what Karath had shown her. Finally, she looked up at him with the same directness that had characterized their first meeting. "What do you think we should do?" The question caught Karath off guard. In all his centuries of existence, no one had ever asked for his opinion on matters of strategy or morality. He had been a weapon pointed at targets chosen by others, not a participant in the decision-making process. "I think," he said slowly, "that this is not a decision I should make alone." Emma nodded approvingly. "That's what friends are for, to help each other make hard choices." They spent the next hour discussing the implications of activating the communication array. Emma's questions helped Karath see aspects of the problem that he had not previously considered. She had an intuitive understanding of human psychology that complemented his tactical expertise, and together they began to develop a plan that might actually work. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of General Mitchell and Dr. Chun. Both women looked grim as they entered the laboratory, and Karath immediately sensed that something was wrong. "We've detected Council ships on the edge of the solar system," General Mitchell announced without preamble. Long-range sensors show at least 50 vessels, including several we've never seen before. They're maintaining position just outside our defensive perimeter. Karath felt his predator instincts engaging as he processed the tactical situation. They are studying your defenses, learning how you have adapted their technology to your own purposes. Our best estimate gives us 72 hours before they're ready to attack, Dr. Chen added. Maybe less if they decide to rush us. Emma looked between the adults with the composed expression that she wore when facing serious situations. So we need to make a decision about the communication array now, don't we? General Mitchell glanced at Karath with surprise. You told her about the project? Emma has proven herself capable of understanding complex situations, Karath replied. Her insights have been valuable in developing potential strategies. What insights? The general asked, her tactical mind immediately focusing on any advantage they might gain. Emma stepped forward with a confidence that had become her trademark. Karatha's device could change everything for the galaxy, but using it would definitely bring the Council's full attention down on us. That's why we haven't activated it, General Mitchell said. We need to focus on defending Earth, not starting a galactic revolution. But what if defending Earth and starting a revolution are the same thing? Emma asked with the simple logic that often escaped adult thinking. The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything they thought they knew about their situation. Karath found himself considering possibilities that he had not previously explored. Explain, he said. Emma moved to the holographic display and gestured at the galaxy map. Right now, the Council thinks they're dealing with one primitive world that got lucky. They're bringing enough ships to smash us flat, but they're not really worried about us. She manipulated the controls to highlight different sectors of Council space. But what if, just as their fleet arrives at Earth, every oppressed world in the galaxy suddenly started receiving messages about how to fight back? What if resistance movements that have been hiding for centuries suddenly knew they weren't alone? General Mitchell began to see where the child's reasoning was leading. The Council would have to choose between crushing Earth and dealing with uprisings across their entire empire. And while they're trying to put out fires everywhere else, we'd have time to prepare better defenses, Dr. Chen added, her scientific mind already working through the logistics. Karath studied the tactical implications with growing respect for Emma's strategic thinking. It was a classic misdirection tactic. Use your enemy's strength against them by forcing them to divide their attention among multiple threats. It is a sound strategy, he admitted, but it depends entirely on other worlds being ready and willing to act when they receive our signal. Only one way to find out, Emma said with a smile that reminded Karath why humans were so dangerous to the Council's way of thinking. General Mitchell was already speaking into her radio, calling for an emergency session of Earth's War Council. If we're going to do this, we need to start preparations immediately. Karath, how long would you need to prepare the array for full activation? 6 hours, Karath replied. But the power requirements will shut down every non-essential system on the planet if we have to, the general interrupted. Dr. Chun, start coordinating with the power grid administrators. I want every available megawatt channeled to this device when Karath gives the word. As the humans began making rapid preparations for what might be the most important broadcast in galactic history, Emma stayed behind with Karath in the laboratory. Are you